So good morning, and thank you for coming to the Policy Committee meeting of the school board. This morning's meeting is being videotaped, so please use your microphones when necessary. We will have community comments at the end, so I'm going to hand it over to Megan Schaefer.
Good morning, everyone, on this lovely morning. Thank you for being here. We have a number of policies that are under for first reading, and we hope to get through all of those today. Some of them, I think the majority of them reflect some minor modifications. We weren't doing complete overhauls of these policies, and I'm going to begin if Mr. Roos is ready with the policy 007, which we discussed the last time, and we had some additional revisions, or the board wished to see some additional revisions, which we incorporated and we can discuss today.
Thank you. The revisions that the committee requested at the last meeting have been incorporated. As you'll recall, this is being brought before you at this time really to kind of update the policy, particularly with respect to the broadcasting or recording of meetings by third parties other than the district. Basically, to make sure that it now complies with what the district actually does permit, and the district has been permitting video recording of its meetings without the requirement of following all of the rules in here, which were adopted, probably 10 years ago. Technology has now, created a situation where people can record meetings without necessarily the level of disruption that may have occurred 10 years ago. So this is updated to reflect that, and to basically, it's also, at your request, it was indicated that in the agenda that people know that could be being recorded by someone, sitting very close to them, so that they need to be aware of that, just in case they say things what they think is they're saying, making a private comment to the person sitting next to them, to make sure they're aware that that comment could be picked up by a recording device, so that people can just make sure they're being very careful. Other than that, it also just a little bit of fine-tuning with respect to those, and it's been very rare occasions where there has been editing of a rebroadcast to preserve student confidentiality, and it's to make it just clearer and easier what that process is.
Are there any questions?
Yes, Ken, I wasn't here at the last policy meeting, and I apologize for that, but I just was questioning where it says dates. Do we have to definitely state a time when the meeting is going to occur?
You do, yes.
Okay.
Now, you can, within that, there's flexibility if you need to change the date or well, not try the date, but there's a little bit of flexibility with respect to the time. If you need to push something off a half an hour, you can, that's, but no, there needs to be a time. You don't want to, and you never want a situation where you've advertised a meeting for a specific time and then you end up starting it earlier than you advertised. It's one thing to push it back half an hour. It's another thing to start a meeting before you said you were.
Okay, now it's just because it says it's a designated district location, so I was just thinking that the designated stated time for the meeting would be the same kind of language.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Are you talking about in the very...
In the very, very beginning, where it says dates.
Well, we do say normally held. You don't need to put that in the policy, but it's probably helpful for someone who isn't... No, there's no requirement that you state that 8 p.m. in your policy. You could say the designated time and date. It's just historically always been 8 o'clock on the third Monday. But it's not required that it be in there.
Okay.
Just think maybe if somebody's looking at that, trying to find out when a meeting is, although it's a kind of odd place to find. You would more likely go to a calendar, but I guess if somebody was looking at the policy to find out when meetings usually occur, they could, I don't know. I was just trying to.
It's your prerogative. If you want the flexibility to be able to change the, if you decided next month, okay, from now on we're going to have our meetings at 7:30 rather than 8. you can do that. You have the power to do that. Would you then change the policy to, yes, the answer is yes. What this does is it kind of makes it a policy decision to change your time as opposed to just a scheduling prerogative, I guess. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
I have a different question.
Okay.
I have a different question, which I raised last month, but then I didn't really follow up on it, which is when I look at the agendas, which is on the first page. So the agenda is spelled out here for a business meeting, correct? Number 2.
Correct.
It refers to a business meeting. And the way we do the business meeting is, audience recognition on agenda items prior to going through the agenda. That's obviously because we're supposed to vote. So if somebody wants to comment before we vote, right? That's the intent, I would assume.
Correct. And it's also required by such an act. Yes.
Okay, so it's a lot too. That's good. And then after the meeting, audience recognition on any matter that could be brought in front of the board. So the way our current education meeting is, it's audience recognition at the beginning, but not at the end, or is there's no audience recognition generally? I'm forgetting which one it is.
No, I think that's covered at the end of the policy. Hearing of the members of the public. Yeah, committee meetings under section I on page 7. It just talks about there's limits for audience recognition, but it doesn't say when it has to be during the meeting.
So
Be whatever the chair
in
wants.
practice, our education meetings don't have on the agenda at the end that there's audience recognition. That's the way they're written. And I think it's been confusing for members of the public because they're Monday night meetings, they're the entire board. And so recently I've been just adding audience recognition because I know people are coming to give feedback. So I'm just wondering, maybe it's not for the policy per se, but maybe it's just a practice that we might want to change on the current agenda. I'm not sure. It seems to me if I'm sort of seeing that people are here and saying, okay, we're going to have audience recognition, people expect when they come to our, Monday night meetings that there's going to be some opportunity for input. So I'm just wondering if you want to.
This clearly contemplates that there's going to be an opportunity for audience recognition at committee meetings.
Okay, so it
however you
sounds like
wanna
it
reflect
really
that.
is just a practice that I can talk to Denise LaPere about in terms of the agenda. Okay, then that's what I'll do, as opposed
Also,
to.
the agenda for this meeting as well, because this doesn't specifically state audience recognition, although you
Right.
historically always have allowed
We
it.
have historically, I just think it's confusing for members of the community when they come to those Monday night meetings. They're sort of used to, if you have something you want to say on the agenda, you do that before the meeting, and then if there's something you want to say more generally, you do it at the end of the meeting, and I just think it's very confusing for people.
Yeah, I agree, Melissa. I'm wondering if, so then for education meetings, we recognize audience members at the beginning, prior to the presentation?
No, I don't,
We don't recognize at all.
There's nothing in the agenda.
Okay,
So-
but we don't necessarily, it's not necessarily a policy issue. It's just a procedural issue in terms of how
That's what I'm asking.
we organize.
The only policy issue is that you have it in the first place, or let you allow it.
Okay.
And that here's what the potential time limits are.
Okay,
So, but there's no policy about when a particular committee chair puts the audience recognition, when and where they put it on the agenda.
Okay, so.
And there's no legal requirement either.
Okay, all
thanks.
right, thank you.
Just to clarify as we go back, I think that reference to the hearings of members of the public was in response to, I think, that concern that you brought up, so there was a clear connection there, and just to clarify, we do not need to articulate an agenda in here that reflects specifically the timing of it, so we could do it by practice. That's what I'm hearing.
Practice and committee chair discretion.
Okay.
Are there any other questions on 007?
Okay, hearing none. We're going to move to our next policy, Policy 107, and there was a handout or some additional revisions that were made since the packet was issued, and everyone should have a copy of that in front of them. Some additional fine-tuning. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Marseille to talk a bit about the revisions in 107 that are proposed.
Sure. Good morning. This, and you've had the opportunity to read this, policy talks about ensuring that every course that we teach have a course guide. And part of the revisions that were, some minor revisions that we put through was that I wanted to articulate that course guides in many areas can be synonymous with a curriculum map or a scope and sequence document. So it does not necessarily have to be articulated as a course guide, which often can be confused with a planning guide, which is that document that high school students get in terms of identifying their courses that they have an option to take. I wanted to remind the board that prior to me taking the position as Director of Secondary Education in 2011, the curriculum team has, prior to that, were heavily involved in reviewing the curriculum maps in attempt to make sure that our course guides, curriculum maps met PDE standards. As you know, that was a time where Pennsylvania was looking at changing its standards and thinking about the keystones and thinking about Common Core, which is now PA Core standards. And there was a lot of work done looking at our current document and making sure that it was aligned to what the state said in many courses. These are the subjects or these are the key topics at a minimum that you should cover. It is not the entire curriculum, but it speaks to what should be covered. So throughout that process, we felt that there were some revisions that we wanted to add and emphasize. We've had a tremendous movement around cultural proficiency and cultural relevance. And we felt that it was an opportunity in those maps that helped guide teachers, right? Because it is a guide. To think more critically about the lessons in which they're presenting. How is that being told in multiple versions from different lenses? So we wanted to have an opportunity to reflect that and make that prominent in the guides. We also had conversations with technology, knowing that it's a big investment from the district. And we wanted to make sure that in those maps, we have teachers articulate to some extent or emphasize really the seamless infusion of instructional practices. So some of these, couple of these changes really reflect some of the work, not all of the work that has been done on the maps, but we wanted to change some of the language to reflect the work that has been done. It's not every column, every section that is indicated in the policy, but we wanted to give a really general view of what we believe should help guide teachers in the delivery of the instruction, which really is then becomes the art of teaching, where the science is really necessarily about the guide, and then the art is really about how in which you deliver that based on the students that are in front of you. We did want to emphasize that it was extremely important that when you think about eligible content, which is what PDE requires on these, that we wanted to accentuate the fact that if you're going to put together a curriculum map, it needs to be aligned to state standards or national standards, or industry standards. It's not the totality of the curriculum, but it really helps secure that there are some non-negotiables in terms of instructional content. So it's been ongoing work, and obviously with Harrisburg going back and forth, vacillating between whether or not they want to put a common, whether open core, it's a living and breathing document that we revisit every year. And that's a costly venture, because we're talking about ensuring that there's appropriate time that professionals have to take a look at this roadmap, for lack of a better term, or this guide or curriculum map, and think about, well, how did that really look in 12-13? I had it in front of me. I taught for 183 days, or it's on the calendar. Did we meet our objectives? Were there things that weren't covered as much as I wanted to cover? Did we extend it too far? So those are the reflective processes that happen during professional development, and those practices that happen during the summer as well. So some minor changes in the language, but staying true to the fact that as a district we believe that every course should be guided by a curriculum map or scope and sequence documents to help inform the way in which every teacher is going to deliver instruction.
Dr. Marseille, I did have a question for the curriculum maps and scope and sequence. That's not in the AR, so how we just reference those generally for teachers on a particular teaching a particular course of study, and then they're directed by the department chair, or how does that happen in terms of practice?
Sure. Every teacher has access to their curriculum maps. And the reason why we reference curriculum map or scope and sequence, because there are, the maps vary in terms of, and there are several, they vary in terms of giving you a big picture about some core content that students should follow. And then they get a little bit more specific in terms of the skills, the objectives, the essential questions, the interventions that are put into place, some of the formative assessments. So on the staff side of our website and in shared folders, teachers do have access to all of their maps, and that helps guide their practice, and it really helps principals and assistant principals inform exactly as they're going through and helping to support teachers. It helps as a guide for them as well to see exactly what is the scope of the work that's being done, when is it being, and when is it being instructed.
One follow-up, lesson planning in practice. How do our new teachers know what the expectation is on each level?
We currently have a lesson plan policy. That policy is expected to be up for review and will be presented to this committee. What we have been doing with our teachers, and specifically in our curriculum professional development committees, the next last meeting, this meeting, and into December, is taking a look at does our current policy that was drafted in '88 really meet the standards of 2013? Does it match with, besides that, does this match with our current practice? And not only that, but as you know, we have Act 82 and the Danielson framework that helps guide teacher practice and really ask teachers to be a lot more reflective about and intentionality about what they do, how they do it, and its connection to each student. So brand new teachers are made aware of the policy, its current practice, but we believe that that practice doesn't mirror our work. So we are currently in a process of refining that document, and teachers and administrators are involved in that dialogue.
But in the simplest terms, the principal is the person who really orients the new teacher to the requirements of a lesson plan, And then the buddy teacher or mentor teacher, more importantly, the mentor teacher for teachers who are brand new also provides guidance and assistance. And it's a topic that we work on in the new teacher induction program in the summer, and it's a topic that we work on in the periodic meetings that we have throughout the year for new teachers. But we don't have a heavy requirement for lesson planning. Lesson plans need to be available, but again, we think there's a lot of work to do, and we began this dialogue last year about ensuring that the lesson plans are at least comprehensive enough so that we have a sense of what the teacher's working on and how they're teaching it and how they're assessing it and how they're using technology, to echo what Dr. Marseille said. And right now it's just much more generic. It's topically, described. We're working on multiplication of fractions, move on. Well, how? And to what extent and how are you assessing the progress? So we've got work to do, and it's going to end up being a strong dialogue in CIPD, and there are some policy implications that are going to come back here. And then there's some labor relations issues connected with that as well.
Thank you to you both.
What is the timeline for that? Did you say?
Well, Dr. Marseille's timeline was to have it done by last June, but we really needed to push it off because he
Right.
sensed the urgency in working on this teacher evaluation piece
Right.
to really have quality lesson plans. But we really think that we need to do this by mid-year. So we're
Okay,
talking
so
about.
it's pretty soon.
Oh, yes.
I'm just trying to get a sense of,
Yeah,
that
CIPD is-
wasn't to suggest
Yeah.
it should have already been done.
No,
I was
no.
just trying to get a sense of when we might be seeing it, because
Mid-year.
I know if it has to go through CIPD.
It's
I'd like to hear-
CIPD's
I'd like to
working on
hear it
that
after that.
next
you know?
meeting.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, all right, we,
After CIPD. not-
our first meeting, we met as a K through 12 team, and we reviewed the current lesson plan policy. We then looked at the Danielson framework to help guide our conversation, because the fact that the framework is going to be used for an evaluation process. And we came up with really what teachers felt at the end of the day should be core components of a lesson plan K through 12. And the elementary team broke off into their section and talked about, well, what does that really look like for elementary? Because there might have some different components to it. Their charge to come back to the next CIPD was to facilitate dialogue at their buildings, saying, our first meeting at CIPD, we talked about this. They're going to bring exemplars or samples from their buildings to say, this is some of the templates. We're going to review that at our next meeting, which is very soon. And then the following meeting, we're going to kind of wrap everything up and say, this is what we believe to be true, and then bring it to the policy committee.
Will it go to curriculum, or it comes to policy first?
Well, we'll inform
As an update.
as an update for the curriculum, but we'll bring it to policy.
Okay.
Yes, both.
Thanks.
I just had one comment. I had noticed in the original draft that came in our packet, there was a sidebar about should it be the principal or superintendent, and I see that you've decided on principal, and I think in what I've been reading about this debate about centralization and decentralization, I'm pleased to see that you went with a more decentralized model of having that, which I think gives teachers somewhat more autonomy, still being supervised, but not having to go to central office for that. So I think that's a good choice.
Thank you.
Also, I just would, on page 2, in the back of 107, it has F. It says arrangements to maintain copies of the current guides on file in each school administrative office, as well as in the office of superintendent, and the addenda that you gave us, that's totally taken out.
It's pulled forward to the page prior.
Modifying it, we deleted it, we moved it up.
Oh, okay.
It was a formatting issue.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
I see, okay.
Any other questions?
Are there any other questions? Okay.
Okay, well, we'll keep moving this forward. And I'm, again, deferring to Dr. Marseille, who took a look at these more curriculum-aligned policies for us, which include the next three, 108, 109, and 110. And I think these reflect some revisions, as well as I think Mr. Roos also had suggested some language to be added. But Dr. Marseille, any additional comments on those?
I don't have any additional comments in terms of the language change. We've been very fortunate. The board's been very supportive in terms of not only the adoption of courses, but in support of the adoption of the textbooks and other curriculum materials. So we really, more so than other places, try to provide a really rich opportunity for teachers in terms of resources. And I think that speaks to our achievement in our work in this district. So this policy just, for me, just speaks to not only are we fortunate, obviously, to have the basic textbooks that our teachers need, but there's a myriad of supplemental resources that are available for teachers that are obviously board approved. And in addition to that, teachers have the autonomy to, when they find items I think that connects to their curriculum, they're bringing to do that. But we want to make sure that, you know, it's a resource that we fundamentally provide for them to implement the curriculum with fidelity. So I don't have any major comments unless I'll answer questions if they come up.
I don't have a question on the policy per se. I think the updated language is fine. I did have a question in terms of, or you to overview with us again, Dr. Marseille, how we make the decisions in terms of updating textbooks. So you'll have some grade levels who'll have, you know, brand new. History Alive is one that comes to mind because I have a middle schooler. And then you have, you know, other students coming through that, you know, have a much more dated textbook. So how, you know, what does that look like when parents are thinking about, well, you know, why does one of my kids have, you know, this new curricula and another has this older one?
That is a conversation that we were, prior to Steve Barbato's departure, that we were going to take a look at our curriculum cycle in terms of the adoption of textbooks. And then we held that off until we were thinking about bringing someone in more permanent. Then Dr. Lewin joined us for a short amount of time, but it extended into a long amount of time. And the conversation was, what do we engage in this with Dr. Lewin, knowing that he was going to move forward, or do we wait for his replacement? So currently, right now, that is on the agenda as a conversation for K through 12. We do have a 5-year curriculum cycle that allows for departments to cycle through and be able to review their curriculum, then make recommendations for changes, then they review possible textbooks, then they go and do a small pilot of that process, then we bring that up to full proposal to the curriculum committee of the board for adoption and purchase. But there's also a fiscal component to that has a heavy impact, and moving from a 5-year to a 6-year cycle, we believe helps us fiscally meet the needs. Though it might extend it, but it has become extremely complicated in these times to try to have major adoptions of major courses all at the same time. So it's a big dollar figure. So we're trying to not only be more fiscally responsive by our budget, but then also give a longer time for the analysis of the textbooks and to give teachers a really opportunity. Because what we've been looking at in Journeys is an example of that, and our work around cultural proficiency is looking at the hallmarks of how textbooks really think differently about every single student. And that takes some time to walk through. We're not talking about token pictures or token statements. We're talking about, does this textbook really fit with the philosophy of the district, making sure that not only the content but the way it's presented speaks to a myriad of students' cultures, experiences, and we felt that we wanted to give some time for that analysis as well.
So just two things. One, the district on paper had this 5-year curriculum cycle that made some sense for middle school and high school, made no sense for elementary school. It was just stupid. When you invest in an elementary school curriculum decision, it takes a couple of years to make the decision. It takes several years. And the example of Journeys is we're in the 3rd year of Journeys, and we've worked through the logistical pieces of doing Journeys. And this year we embedded Journeys with a whole lot more culturally relevant texts. So it's a better curriculum than it was the 1st year and the 2nd year, and now we're in the 3rd year. Hopefully we're going to get 5 or 7 years out of Journeys before we think about implementing it. The other thing that's changed dramatically since the district had adopted this 5-year cycle in 2007 was that when we buy a textbook, we're not buying a textbook, we're buying a program. And so History Alive is a great example. History Alive is a program that actually doesn't have a text, has some print materials, but has a whole lot of online resources. And at our math program, our reading program, and everything that we're purchasing now, the French books that we purchased last year have an array of online resources. So that does a couple of things. One, it makes it easier for the publisher to modify the text and keep it relevant. So it's not that, we're sitting with the books that said, all about the Soviet Union and we don't have the Soviet Union anymore. That was a real thing. That goes away when we have online resources. So that's a good thing. It means that we can probably stay with things like History Alive for a longer period of time. But it takes longer for us to learn them and really, fully implement them because they're much more interactive and they require the teacher to learn a lot more things. It's not that there's a book and a teacher's guide. There's a book or books or supplemental print materials and a teacher's guide, but the teacher's guide is online, and the work that kids are doing and the work that parents are doing with kids sometimes is online as well. So that kind of stretches out the cycle, and we're kind of dealing with those realities.
And I don't know how this would be addressed, or if it even can be addressed. But from just as a parent, the way we implement the changes is at least it's you go elementary school, then we went to 6th grade right, and we keep going up. But the kids who just missed the changes
Right.
are hitting the older curriculum all the way through. So do you know what I'm saying? So I don't know if there's a sense of being well, if you implement some at one level and some at another, so at least one child going through.
There were other high school curricular changes done in the last few years that those
Right.
kids are going to hit.
Right.
And they are hitting them. They're hitting them in math. They're hitting them in science. So there are other things. But yes, we were building up, and there was this group that had the old math program and the old reading program, and had the old social studies program, but when we get to high school, and maybe Dr. Msay can point to some examples. There are places in high school where we have.
Oh, I know we
revised
have been
curriculum.
revising the curriculum
Right.
all along. I mean, I've been here. I realize that,
yeah.
and it's helpful. I don't
Yeah.
remember
But
getting
it's true. There were kids who had the old math program and the old reading program.
in the old social studies.
And the old
both.
social studies.
Yeah. So I just if there's ways of implementing it. So
I think you raise a great point, and I think that part of the conversation is.
I mean,
is
that may
really,
just be the road. I mean,
yeah,
that just may
but
be
part
what
of that
happens.
conversation, I think, is really being really intentful about that dialogue, and I don't, and I want to have a much stronger dialogue about that process, and I know that there were things that came up within a curricular program that wasn't necessarily forecasted where we had to go to this change, which then kind of threw the sequencing out of sync. So when you were anticipating to move with this program, something comes that was unexpected. Now your 5-year cycle that was on paper, realizing, oh, we can't move forward with this curriculum cycle. We got to move with this process, which then adds to the comment that you made earlier about that process. So I think this school year, and with Dr. Doria here, you're not going anywhere. Okay. the conversation, the conversation is going to be more intentful in terms of making sure that we try as much as possible to address all of those questions.
I want to be clear here. I mean, we've made really significant changes to the curriculum across the board. So, and which is impressive. And so I don't want to, we've been making a lot of changes, and I think for the better. And I know that we're talking about changes all the way through. So I just was wondering on that kind of timing issue.
But the other timing issue, like in elementary schools, because we did math and reading, and now we're doing science, we've just kind of put little Band-Aids on social studies in elementary school.
Yes.
So now middle school, the sixth graders have the new History Live program, but like that's still out there. And the reason why the K-12 5-year cycle was not appropriate for elementary schools is because the elementary teachers teach all the subjects. So you can't have the same teachers doing a review and planning and implementation of every subject every year. You can do that when you have separate content areas. People can take a role in different things, but it's not something you can sustain in elementary schools. And the elementary teachers have gone through an awful lot of change in the last several years, and we know social studies is out there, and it's not where we want it to be.
I had a question about the policy, and Dr. McGinley's comments talked about it. When you talk about textbook, is there some way in the AR or something to explain, because I was confused that if you were referring to actual paper textbooks or this broader e-textbooks and other stuff, and is there some way to make it clear that this is not, we're not just talking about old-fashioned?
Yeah, I think we can do that.
I was a little confused
and
about
it's a great point, because Dr. McGinley and I were having a conversation thinking about our strategic plan and talking about what will Lower Merion look like 10 years from now. And it brought up, and that made me think that with technology moving so quickly, that the terminology textbook is different now. It so definitely will be different years from now. So I think you're right that we'll make some language that addresses
Or even just
addresses
like an
that.
asterisk, textbook is defined broadly to include a
Okay.
variety of learning tools or something. And my other question was, when we're talking about this cycle, what do we do when we discard old-fashioned textbooks or other stuff? Is there a way that we can make that available to other schools that maybe are being more drastically hit by budget issues, that could even, our older stuff would be better than having nothing for them?
We have offered textbooks that we saw as useful. I mean, there are some things that are out of date, that are just completely inappropriate. But when we replaced the math textbooks, we kind of made known that they were available. And there were some other schools who asked us for some quantities of them, and we actually ended up shipping somewhere out of the country. I forget where, but we did send them on, and we had collected them because we had hundreds and hundreds of these books, and they were a basically sound course of study. And so some school without resources or with very, very limited resources could be helped by that. So we have moved them along. But then there are times when we just decide this is just something we need to, yes, no one should have this for a whole variety of reasons, because it's just outdated, or it communicates things that are just not at all appropriate for this day and age.
Are there other questions?
We sort of took these as a set. Do we want to turn to each individual? We focus mostly on textbooks, but I think the resource materials, I didn't know if we were also asking questions as a result of those changes.
And I just want to echo that. I think that our learning centers or media centers do an outstanding job of providing these resources, and our librarians do a really great job in making sure that our media specialists do an outstanding job in ensuring that, in addition to the textbooks or the e-books or other resources, that their supplies and materials support and enhance the curriculum as well.
I don't have any questions on these. They all look fine. I did, well, just briefly, Supervisor of Library and Media Center, is that the formal name? I'm looking on page, I guess it's 1, but policy AR 109, page 1. So you have, is
Right.
that the right name? Yes?
No, and that's a good question. And what I wanted to say generally about these policies, I think with respect to the ARs, we'll take a closer look at those between now and the next time we bring these forward to make sure that everything's aligned and there's some consistencies in light of some of the changes we've made here, but that's an excellent point, and we'll make that
Okay, so they'll
revision.
stay on our docket until we review them more thoroughly.
Right,
Okay.
right. We'll make sure that any changes are reflected, and you'll see those changes to the AR as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on either 109 or 110? All right. The next policy, which was hadn't been reviewed in quite some time, but Mr. Roos brought up an excellent point to our attention around how things have changed and options or other, I guess, going back to the electronic, expanding the definition and under textbooks, we have a similar situation here. So I'll let Mr. Roos speak to that.
This is, again, updating in light of new technology, the smoking policy. There's a product out now called e-cigarettes, electronic cigarettes. I seem to be the only person that never heard of these things until about a month ago. And then, so basically this is just to kind of plug a hole in your smoking policy because they're not really covered. And they look, if you've ever seen them, they look exactly like cigarettes. If you want to, if you can see a picture of this from here, they pretty much look exactly like cigarettes. Anybody wants to see? Yeah, they do. They have. They're just, and some of them have nicotine, some of them don't. So there's no. It can be either one. But yeah. And but if students got one, you wouldn't be able to tell whether it was. So you don't want to. So. Anyway, that's all this does.
Can I have a question
Dr.
about that? And maybe it's not for discussion, but as obviously thinking from the lens as an administrator, a building administrator, I'm thinking, would that be considered an what's it called again, or
An e-cigarette.
an e-cigarette will be considered in terms of the same violation as a standard?
No, it's the same violation as far as school discipline. It's not, however, reportable to the district justice. There's requirements under state law that that students who are caught smoking have to be referred to the district justice and have to pay a fine, or the parents pay a fine. That does not apply to e-cigarettes because the state hasn't updated its laws.
Okay.
Well,
okay.
or they may never. Who knows? I mean, or 6 months from now, the FDA could come out and say that e-cigarettes are completely fine. We don't know. At this point, it's still under study, but so it will apply to school-based consequences. Will be the same.
Okay.
I hate to say criminal. The societal-based consequences are different.
Okay.
Any questions? Okay. All right. Moving on, for the second reading, we're moving forward with the policy 806, which was up for a first reading at our last business board meeting. I don't recall or didn't note any recommended changes from the full board, so we'll move forward with the second reading on that policy. And just to remind audience members as well as the board, there were some modifications to that policy to extend it to include or to give more specific guidance to the administration with respect to volunteers. and how to screen, and what types of volunteers would be required to undergo screening and background checks. So.
So we're on to the discussion items.
Yes.
Yeah, ARs.
Oh, the ARs, the AR 235 was also amended, a minor revision to connect to the 815, policy 815 that we just discussed. So it's a cross-reference there, again, to address the local student disciplinary consequences. And then AR 216, the last time we were together, we discussed the retention of testing protocols, and that's still something that's under review by the administration, so we don't have an update at this point, but wanted to keep it as a placeholder, so we'll bring it back, and ideally that will be at our next policy meeting. So we're working with the solicitor's office to sort of define best practices and come up with a term that works for the district administratively. So, and then our next item under discussion is a turn to AR 206, which Mr. Roos is prepared to recap the discussion that we had the last time we were together, and it's also, again, something that, as far as our overall calendar for discussion of attendance areas, we had indicated to the community that we would be having a discussion, or it would be on our agenda here today. So I'll turn it back over to Mr. Roos.
That's correct. And similar to where discussion we had last month, this is on your agenda because, I mean, this is the administrative regulation that talks about what the attendance boundaries are. As I stated last month, this was never, the administrative regulation itself was never formally updated based on the attendance area, choice areas as they were established in 2009. So this is just being held in abeyance until the board makes its decision, which is scheduled to be on your agenda in the November board meeting.
Okay, I think that we went through all our items on the agenda. If anybody has any audience comments, you can come in and sign in with Megan Schaefer. Okay, I think we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Oh, when's the next meeting? When's the next meeting? It's November, first week of November. My phone is dead.
November 8th, Friday, November 8th.
Friday, November 8th at 8:30 a.m. in this room. Thank you. Now we're adjourned.
Okay.